Dollars and Cents with Christine. My name is Christine Stevenson. I am your host, and we're here today to talk about your dollars and making sense with them. Thanks for listening in. And I want to give a special shout out to Dan over in London, UK. We had a great conversation this morning. Story that happened to me just yesterday. Oftentimes through the Dave Ramsey website, I get leads through that, and sometimes they send me a message. Sometimes there's no message. There's just a name and an email, or maybe a name and a phone number. They are looking for some help in some capacity with their money. They took the time to get into the website, to put in their name and address and email, and maybe a little message because there's something going on. So this happened yesterday. I'm going to start today's show with this little story about a man named Paul and his wife Gina. And by the way, just so you know, I'm always changing the names of the people and the circumstances, or where they live rather, so I can, protect their privacy. But the stories are real. The information I get is real, and it's true. It's real life, and if it's happening to them, I'm assuming it's happening to you as well. So I'm condensing these stories down for the time constraints here in the studio. But yesterday I walked out of the T3 gym, and I saw there was a message waiting for me from someone interested in coaching, and the message read, "Getting out of debt and how to make ends meet." That was it, very cryptic. So I thought, okay, this is interesting. And I called the number. Most of the time, like I said, people don't answer the phone, but the man answered the phone. So I was like, oh my gosh, this is a pleasant surprise. So I got into this conversation with him. So I ended up sitting there in the parking lot of the T3 gym in the truck cab with the AC running, and the truck cab became my office for the next 45 minutes. So I spoke with Paul for the better part of an hour and asked him to share with me, was there something in particular that had happened today, meaning yesterday, that caused him to go in to the website, take the time that he did, type in his name and his email and phone number, and send this little message? Was something in particular happening that day, or had it been a series of events or circumstances that had been going on for a while, and he's finally deciding to take some action? That's what I like to ask people when I first start to talk to them. It gives me a gauge of where they're at. And most people like to share what's happened, what's going on. There's some stress or concern, and so they talk, and it's very easy to let people just go on and talk because they like to share. And as you know, Matt, when you hear in radio, when the only way of communicating with someone, well, speaking, but you're listening, you can't see them. And so you develop a heightened sense of listening. You're hearing more than just the words, the emotion and stuff behind them. And I know you know what I'm talking about. So I developed that at the IRS because I spent several years on the phone just listening. So I'm really listening to Paul. Paul and his wife live in Waco, and they had come to me, again, through the Dave Ramsey website. They had recently heard about Dave and started working their debt snowball. And for those of you that are listening, the debt snowball method means listing your debt from least to greatest without regard to the interest rate and paying off the smallest debt as quickly as possible while making minimum payments on the other debt. If your goal is to get out of debt, we stop saving and we throw all the money at the lowest debt. The idea being to pay that off quickly so you have a psychological win of paying off that credit card, and that inspires you, and you keep going. So Paul works full time. His wife Gina has a little part-time job. They have 2 kids in college. One of them is away out of state, and the other 2 are home. They're in high school and in middle school. They're involved in sports and different activities. They have 4 cars. So I immediately thought, 4 cars. Wow, I wonder if those cars are paid for or not. What's the situation with them? Turns out they're paying out $1,500 a month towards those vehicles. They pay $1,500 a month towards those vehicles. $1,500. That's a lot of money. In addition, Paul's company now wants him to move closer to the home office. That was part of the deal he signed with the contract he made with them. And his daughter is going to be a senior in high school this year. So Paul and Gina have kind of created the opposite. Unintentionally, they've created the opposite lifestyle that they want to have. They're in debt. They're trying to get out of it, and they want to learn to budget and do well with their money. So Paul's explaining all these things to me, which, by the way, are perfectly legitimate things that we all do in our lives. I know I've done them, and they become normal. They become normal part of our everyday life. So he went on to explain how money comes in, and then whoosh, it just seems to go out, and they can't get beyond the money that comes in and the money goes out. There's never quite enough left over. And I said, that's paycheck to paycheck living. And it's very common here in America. I'm assuming it's common elsewhere in the world, paycheck to paycheck living. Paul talked to me for about 30 minutes, and I asked a few clarifying questions along the way. And then I said, Paul, I'm going to ask you a question, and I want you to take 30 seconds to really think about the answer before you answer, okay? Okay, great. So, audience, if you're listening, I am asking you the same question. I invite you to listen to this as well. Remember, we've been talking with Paul and Gina, and his message to me was getting out of debt and how to make ends meet. So I said, Paul, this is a question. I want you to think about this. What do you and your wife, Gina, really, really want? Maybe all of 5 seconds went by and he blurts out immediately to get out of debt. He was so forceful and you could just hear the emotion and the intensity behind it. Boom. So there it is. I said, okay, Paul, what are you and Gina willing to do to make that happen? And there was a long pause. And because we're on radio, we can't do a long pause for the effect because that's not good to do. But I could hear the wheels turning in his brain. And after a little pause, he says, well, I guess whatever it takes. Great. Okay, let's talk about that. What does it mean to you when you say whatever it takes? That's different for everybody. I said, how intense are you willing to get to do whatever it takes? So what are you and Gina willing to do to make that happen? Long pause. And again, and this is the point where as a coach, it's really hard, but you need to shut your mouth and just listen and let people talk. So I said, Paul, I'm going to say something that sounds really cruel and heartless, okay? Okay. I said, Paul, I don't care if your kids get a college education. Pause. I said, Paul, I don't care if your kids have a car to drive in college. And he kind of chuckles nervously. I said, Paul, how old are you? And he's 54, and Gina's near the same age. I said, Paul, your retirement, whatever that means to you, and we haven't even talked about that yet, have we? We haven't defined what do you want to do in retirement? What's your monthly income and expenses? Will you be able to retire? How much have you saved? We haven't talked about any of that. And I said, Paul, your retirement is coming faster than your kids' retirement, right? Right. Your kids are in their 20s, so they have about 40 years or so for their retirement, maybe longer, right? Right. I said, Paul, whatever your retirement means to you and Ginny, your retirement is knocking on the door. You know what I mean? Yes. And the weight of his yes, he got it. And I said, you just told me you want to get out of debt. That's what you really, really, really want. And I heard that. And you're living paycheck to paycheck, which means, I'm assuming, probably not a lot of money is going towards retirement, right? Right. Well, what else do you want, Paul? What else do you and Gina want? And there was a bit of a pause, and you can hear him thinking. He said, well, we'd like to get away for a weekend from time to time, maybe a short day trip somewhere. Just a small, simple little goal like that. They can't even do that. And I said, what else do you want, Paul? What else do you and Gina want? Well, we'd like to get out to dinner by ourselves every once in a while, maybe once a month. Again, a small little goal. And so this conversation is going like this, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. What do you want? He's sitting there, and I can envision him sitting there where he's at in his house as I'm sitting in the truck cab and the AC is running. And he's thinking, and I'm saying, what is keeping you from going out to dinner once a month with your wife? What is keeping you from going out and having a nice short day trip somewhere? Pause. Well, it's our debt. All this debt that we have to pay, that we want to get out of debt. This is our goal. And I said, right, it's your debt. And we talked about, he and Gina had unintentionally created this lifestyle. So we went back and forth. And unfortunately, I had to get going. And so I kind of had to end my call with Paul, but I could really hear him thinking about all these things that I was asking him. And I said, I tell you what, Paul, was this conversation helpful for you? Yes. Would you like to have more of a conversation like this, you and Gina? Yes, absolutely. I said, here's what I want you to do. Talk with Gina. I'm going to send you a link to my calendar. Pick a day and a time on my calendar where you and Gina and I can sit down and have a conversation. That's what we're going to do. We'll start with a conversation. That's what I tell everybody. 60 minutes, you'll get on my calendar, and we'll go from there. Is that okay? Yes, it was.